right? There are a multitude of ways to do them. Everyone's got sort of their own style. I'm going to show you 2, 3, maybe 4 different ways you can do it. It really depends on how much time and energy you want to spend into it and what part of the process you like the best, right? Like most things in clay, a lot of it is like figure out what part you don't like and then figure out like ways to work around that, right? At least for myself, that's how I work. Like I hate waiting for things to dry. So a lot of my surface design happens like right as I throw something, and then I don't worry about it until it's like either time to trim or it's time to like put it in the bisque, right? So the first sort of most like classic way to make handles, kind of the old like carrot pull handle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lump of clay. This is maybe 3/4 of a pound, half a pound, roughly, right? And you can make this as big or as little as you want, because you can keep pulling off of it if you need to. All right, so for that like classic carrot handle, can you all see? For sure, good deal. That classic carrot handle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make the same potato thing like I did before when we're throwing, right? But I'm going to sort of rub it in between my fingers until I can get it down to be more of like a carrot shape, right? You want it to start like this. You're going to end up with one wide side and one sort of narrow side. A lot of pottery, this is like your classic handle, right? So we're going to start there. So I'm just going to spend some time kind of rolling this out in between my hands until I know it's in a shape that I'm going to be able to then pull, right? And then just like throwing, it's especially important actually with handle pulling, super wet clay, super wet hands all the time, right? And the reason I make it a carrot as well is so I have this like area up top here that I can pinch, right? Because I'm going to be pulling against this. So wet clay, wet hands. And I'm just with even sort of soft pressure. I'm not doing a ton of pressure. If you do, you'll notice like you'll pinch it, especially with clay that's this soft. You'll pinch it right off or you'll get like weird kinks and bends in it, right? Which we don't want. So we're just using very soft, even pressure. We're taking our time. And this is a process that like takes a minute, right? Taking our time, and I'm kind of just, my hand motion is kind of just squeezing as I pull down, right? Trying to keep it as straight as I can. If you have like a bend to your wrist, you'll notice like your handle starts to bend like that. So if you can, try to just go straight down this way.
I was going to say the same thing. It looks like you're milking it.
It does, yeah. It's got that sort of vibe to it, right? And then always wetting my hands, wetting my clay. And you can see like I'm spinning this thing around as I'm doing it. That way I don't end up with a handle that's like weirdly the shape of my like palm here, you know what I mean? If I spin around it, it should maintain a pretty round shape.
So you are spinning with that top hand?
Yep. So the top hand spins, a lot of times I'll like move my other hand around too, but like realistically you could get away just doing this and then this hand spinning. And you can see like this is taking a minute, you know what I mean? And I'm just moving little bits of clay at a time. As I start getting closer to the length I'm gonna want my handle, right? No matter what I do, end up with this weird little tail here, you know what I mean? Which is like, don't be like sad if that happens. I've been making handles for 20 years and I still do that. So I basically just pull this until that tail breaks off because there's a weak point right here. You can see where it goes like angles this way and then starts to angle this way. I'm going to keep pulling until that tail breaks off, and then I'm going to switch the style of how I'm pulling. All right, tail's gone. Put that aside for now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to like I sort of imagine this as like a duck's bill, right? This is what I do to get a flatter handle. I really prefer a flat handle versus a really rounded handle. So if you want to have a handle that's round the whole way through, you just keep doing it this way. The duckbill thing is what you can do to sort of flatten that out. And so all I'm doing is basically like taking my scissors basically and like squeezing down as I go. Same process as this, right? But I've got a nice little like corner of my finger here that'll round out my edges as I do this. And so I kind of just switch back and forth from doing it this way, and I'll switch over here, do it this way. Every once in a while I'll give it like a round pull.
The reason you're doing this is for the length right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to get that carrot into like being handle length, right? And also this is like adjusting the shape of it from being round to being flat. I also find I get a nicer curve on a handle if it's flat. Hello. So from here, just so you guys can really see in the camera, right? What I'm really doing is like coming up here, squeezing and pulling down. And then I do it from this side, squeeze and pull down. And you can sort of tell when you're getting close, right? When you go to like change it and that starts getting like sort of that classic handle bend. That's how I know I'm getting close to what I want to be at, right? So I'm gonna spend just a little bit more time. You could put in like a thumb groove here if you want. I don't really like a thumb groove too much. It's hard to get it to stay straight in my opinion, so spend a little bit more time pulling this. Once I have it close to where I think it needs to be, I'm gonna do that thing where I let it sort of tell me what bend it wants to be at, which would be like roughly right there. And then I just squeeze that onto some kind of surface, and I don't touch this until it's dry enough to handle that, right? Does that make sense to everybody?
When would that be?
We'll go over that later, right? So I'm gonna make these now. Traditionally what I do, if I know I have to trim pots, right? Like I have some mugs here that I need to trim, I pull 2 handles for every 1 mug, because inevitably you're gonna mess one up, right? Like that's just kind of the way it goes. So I pull 2 handles for every 1 mug, and then I'll go and I'll trim my pots. If you're working in series, which is like what most potters do, you'll pull like 20 handles, right? Then you'll go trim 10 mugs. By the time you're done trimming the 10th mug, that first handle's roughly ready to go on, right? So you kind of just have to play the waiting game till you can get to where you need to be. And here's some examples of like ones I did earlier, so that hopefully we don't have to wait quite as long, right? So that's sort of your most classic way to pull handles. I'm going to show you a much, much easier way real quick, and then I'm going to show you the way that I do it. So, in my opinion, one of the easiest ways I've ever seen to pull handles is Kemper makes these tools, and I think there might be another company that does too. They're basically a trim tool that is like equal on both sides. So you know like our like paracord tool is like fat on one side and skinny on the other. Then our regular trimming tools are just like a little bit too long. They make these, and they make a slightly bigger version too. And you can basically just take this and drag through your clay. And then if you can, this is the tricky part, right? Opening up the clay so you can pull out that lug you just did, which is always harder than it looks. But this is basically just the same thing as like extruding a handle, right? And this will give you like a blank. Kind of the same deal as like if you just rolled a coil. But this gets you closer to what I think like a nice handle shape would be, right? And you're gonna have to spend some time cleaning it up and doing that whole thing. But what I would do is like pull out a coil like this, break it up into pieces, and then you can kind of just, depending on what kind of handle you want, just do the same thing where you set them up into a curve, and then you can come back later and clean up all these like weird edges to them, right? That's probably your easiest bet, right? Just like a different way to make a coil. The unfolding the clay is kind of tricky. But besides that, like really easy way to get a blank, right? Handle blanks. Now the way that I traditionally make a handle, don't need this water right now. What I usually do is start out with, depending on what size handle I want, right? Same thing as like when you're trimming or when you're throwing, think about your intent before you start making. So if on a mug, say this size, right? For one, maybe this big, I could get away with a 1-finger handle. Most of the time I make 2-finger handles because if you have small fingers, you can fit 3 in there. If you have big fingers, you can fit 2, right? A thing I try to keep in mind, like depending on like who's gonna be using my mug, right? I'm gonna shoot for a 2-finger handle, so I know I roughly need like a little bit bigger than a golf ball size hunk of clay that I then roll into a circle. Get roughly here, right? And then I'll rub it through my hands like this. Just trying to elongate it a bit, right? And then from there what I do is I have a bunch of these like little like mini bats, right? But you could do this on any surface. But I'll come down on a surface that's porous, so it's gonna dry out a little bit. And I'll come down and I'll push a diamond shape into one side and flatten it, right? I do that, and then I pinch that diamond shape up towards the other end until I get most of the way to the other end. I'll flip it around, and I'll establish another diamond shape on that side, right? What I really like in a handle is a handle that starts out chunky. It's got a thick like attachment point, which leads to stronger handles. It gets thin in the middle, and then it's got another thick attachment point at the other end. I think it looks better. I think it's more comfortable. I think structurally it's the most sound of like most of the handles that I've seen people do. So this is like one of the reasons I do that. So basically it's a little mix of pinching your handle out, and then at the end we're going to be doing some pulling just to make it look nicer. So take my diamond shape at the end here, right?
Can you hold up that diamond?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, so basically I'm just doing this.
You need diamond.
Diamond.
Down the thing.
Yeah, diamond. I don't know. Yeah, diamond shape like that. What's that?
I was thinking you were doing a diamond shape on each end, but you're saying a diamond.
No, kind of a.
Like that. I see
Yeah,
it.
just like this. I'm making one of these.
I got it.
Right? And you can see by the shape of it, right? It's like, especially if I go over here, this is the shape that my fingers are making.
Yeah.
So I take that and I pinch in. I start just a little bit above the edge because I want this to maintain some of its fatness, right? And I'm just going to pinch in and squeeze until I get to that other end. And then what I do is I take these ends here and I pinch those in this way. Can you guys see that okay? Let's see if I can get closer to the camera. Pinch these in this way, and then I flip it and I pinch the other side of the diamond that way. And then I just repeat the process of like diamond pinch, trying to get some length, right? Then I'm going to take this way, pinch it in the middle, pinch it in the middle. And you can kind of see the handle shape we're ending up with, right? Where it's like fat on this end, it tapers both this way and this way, then it gets fat on this. It's almost like a giant dog bone, right? It's kind of what we're looking for. But in my opinion, if I just left this like this, it looks kind of ugly and unfinished to me. You know what I mean? Like some people, this is like their motif. It matches with their pots really well, so they'll just be done here. What I usually do is do just a teensy tiny bit of pulling just to make that curve look a little bit more elegant, make it have a more natural bend to it. So sort of same deal as I was doing before. I kind of pinch one end from the top because I've got a fatter end right here. And I'm going to hydrate just the middle part. So I'm not doing the like dip the whole piece in type thing, right? Hydrate just the middle part, get my hands really wet. And I'm also spending some time rounding out those corners here just because I made two sharp points there. And then I'm going to do basically just the duck part, but I'm not going to run all the way off of the pot. I'm going to take my like duck beak and I'm going to end before my other fat point. Does that make sense? So I do this, and then I switch sides, get it hydrated again, round out those corners, hit it with the duck bill, switch sides. And I basically just do this until I feel like I've got it long enough to where it's going to get a nice bend for a 2-finger handle, and also I don't want it to be too thin, so I'm just keeping that in mind as I go. We got this done this way, right? So to me, that looks like once I establish my bend, that's going to be long enough. So what I then do is on any surface, right? I usually do it on one of these bats so I can move it around. But I'll take this. Let me do it this way so you can see. I'll secure one end of this to the table. Then I'll take this other end and I'll kind of lay it flat like this. I'll squeeze that down into a shape that I like. Say about there, right? And then I spend some time really adjusting this curve that's going on here so that I have a nice, like almost ear shape going on the whole way, right? So that to me looks like a pretty decent handle curve. And so I'll just let that sit, work on my other pots, and then once it's ready, we'll move on, okay? Does that make sense? This, in my opinion, like this is how I do handles. It yields the most comfortable handle. It's super structurally sound. I really like it. But whatever one sort of floats your boat is what you guys should run with, okay? Does anyone have any questions? All right, attaching handles, right? I'm gonna take one of these pieces that I trimmed earlier, right? This one seems pretty dry. Not so dry that I can't do it though, right? And it still maintained a pretty good round on there. So attaching handles is relatively simple. What you have to do is choose the handle you want to use, right? So I usually do something like this. I see this one's a little too tall for my piece. So I might actually use this one, right? And just cut it right about there. So I'm gonna grab a sharp tool real quick. Any kind of knifey thing will do. I'm just gonna cut this part off. Kind of flat like that, right? And then I can then decide like, oh, that's too much handle for this mug, right? So I'm gonna cut it down just a little bit more. Get it to about there. That seems pretty decent, you know what I mean? We're really just looking for like what seems like too much, what seems like not enough, right?
And remind me how that's like that's not a little thing.
No, this will be like a 2-3 finger handle, right? This is a big boy, yeah, for sure. So the next thing I'm gonna do is, if your handles are all like goopy after you've made them, like don't worry about that because there's always a point like right around here. This is a little firm, in my opinion, and I'll actually pass this one around if you guys want to pass this one. If you want to fill, that's a little too hard, in my opinion, right? Where it doesn't have a lot of give to it. So I'm going to soften that by spending some time with a sponge. And before I attach the handle, cleaning up any like weird inconsistencies or like goop or, you know what I mean? There's always, these things never look,
Fingernail mark.
yeah, they never look perfect after you're done doing them.
And Tyler, did you make that handle today?
I made that before we got here.
Yeah.
And I left it out for a couple hours, right? It just in here, and then I put it outside for like 10 minutes and it dried a bunch in that 10 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm gonna spend some time just cleaning this up now, right? When I do that, it'll also give me a little bit of bend, right? It puts a little bit more plasticity in there so I can adjust it just a teensy bit more. Then what I'm gonna do is take my pot, look for the worst side, right? It's like, I felt like there was a bump somewhere. There's a bump right here, right? So that's where the handle's gonna go, in my opinion. I'm gonna set that there. See where they line up. And then I kind of hold this one over like this. And I take any sharp tool, right? I'm just using like this brush that's got a point on one side. And I mark where the handle touches my pot. Then what I do is I take this as a toothed rib, right? A serrated rib. You can use a fork, you can use a needle tool, scratched a bunch of times. Point being, you want to scratch the surface so that you have a good point for things to bond to, right? So I'm going to do that there. I'm going to do that especially on the bottom because the bottom's not very fat. Like I said, like a handle that I usually make, I prefer a chunky side here and a chunky side here. This style of handle doesn't yield you that, but I want you guys to see how to attach it.
And what else can you use if you don't have a serrated fork or something? Just any.
Just a fork would work, right? Or like any sharp tool, like a needle tool, you could just do it. This is basically just like has like 25 needles that I'm able to do this really quickly. I'm going to do that. What I usually do then is we'll put this in water for just a second, right? So that those 2 points there saturate. Then I'll set it off to the side. Then I'll find on my cup those points that I marked out, and I will repeat the process right there with a kind of wet serrated blade, wet needle tool, wet fork, what have you. Basically, I'm trying to just create some inconsistencies there so that when I have those two scraped sides, what they do is they like, as I push them together, they sort of lock, you know what I mean? And that'll create me a really strong handle. So now that that's done, I do have this like little bit of goop. Anytime you're throwing, just like make a little reservoir of your goop because your goop is basically glue. So then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take a wet brush, dip it in some of that, what we call slip, right? And then I'm gonna add just a little bit of extra glue to those points that I've scraped up. I'm then going to take my handle, place it on those points. And I really just want to get one side kind of stuck so when I hold it like this, it doesn't fall off, right? I'm going to do that. Then what I do is I'll set it down on something. Bracing from the inside, I'll then give it like some wiggle and some push to try to get those 2 points to seal to each other very well. All right, so it's a little jiggle, it's a little wiggle, and a little forward pressure, right? And you can see how much goop exploded out of the sides when I did that. I'm gonna repeat that process for the bottom. And I do that usually just with these two fingers. I am bracing from the inside still because I don't wanna like have so much pressure that I like put a crack in my pot or I dent my pot. Just a little jiggle, a little push right there. You can see like goop exploding out of that side too, right? What I then do is I clean off my brush. And then all that goop where it exploded out, I'm just gonna go through and sort of seal that all together and create like a nice smooth point where all those attachment points meet. Some people will do this and like try to smear everything together. Like that's fine if you wanna try to do that. This handle's too dry to do that with, and I prefer to do this with a slightly drier handle so I can handle it without messing it up. So I'm just gonna spend some time cleaning those attachment points up, because also when I glaze, there's like little corners and stuff here. Those get filled with glaze and they look really nice afterwards.
What about the part at the bottom of the handle that's sticking out?
This like tiny little bit here?
Yeah.
That's fine. As long as it's attached well, it'll be fine, right? And I could spend some time like trying to change the shape of this very tip so that that doesn't seem like a thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just did that. Like you can't really, there's not really much difference. You just want a good strong attachment point, right?
So the first step is like seeing where the handle, where you want it, and then you etch into the mug for the placement.
Yep. So now that that's done, I'll spend just a teensy more time really making sure there's no like cracks. This is also a good point to see like if you squeezed hard enough, because sometimes there'll just be like a big side that you missed. You know what I mean? So this is a good point for that. And then I'll take a sponge real quick, and I will clean up any marks that I left on my piece. Don't over sponge it, right? Especially if it's dry, because this clay has grog in it, so it's going to bring some of that grog to the surface, which isn't ideal, but like.
What's grog?
Grog is like the little stone and particulate that's in clay to give it more structural stability. The drier a thing is, the more you use a sponge, you basically wipe away all the soft material and all the hard grog stays. So it ends up feeling more like a rock or like a stone, right? You can knock that down in the bone dry stage with a Scotch-Brite pad. So that's like another thing I do in the Scotch-Brite stage. But you guys can see like pretty clean looking handle done right there.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful.
Cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a couple more. If you guys want to hang out and watch, great. If not, you want to go do your thing, go do your thing.
We just have like, what, 28 minutes left?
Yeah, real quick. So say I did this, right? I am then gonna dry this upside down, put plastic down, then the pot upside down, wrap it up. I want the handle and the mug to be at the exact same wetness level. Otherwise, one shrinks more than the other and they break, right? So for 24 hours, this needs to sit in its own little greenhouse so that things kind of homogenize. You know what I mean? So I'm going to do like all my mugs, and then I'll put them all in the same thing, and I'll leave them for a day.